On this episode of the WildFed Podcast.
Turkey hunting is a fantastic inroad into the world of hunting.
He came unglued. He did something that I haven't seen a bird do before, and I was fascinated by it.
The hens would walk right into my decoy. I'm like, why can't you bring your boyfriend?
Fins in the blind, shaking like a leaf, like, Dad, is this gonna happen?
He was exactly where he was supposed to be and did exactly what I didn't want him to do.
Something to be said for getting out as early into a season as you possibly can before they become witty to what's going on.
It's more of a instead of a...
Slide the shotgun, slide the bag, crawl up on my knees, slide the shotgun, slide the bag, gobble call.
I'd call, he'd gobble, back and forth, back and forth.
Oh, the best delicious parts.
Oh, he's in my freezer. I plucked him.
2 pot pies.
The first meal is the hearts, livers.
The best part of it is sitting down at the dinner table that night, his sister's eating it, his mom eating it, and him just looking around the table, realizing what he did.
Episode 40 of the WildFed Podcast, Turkey Calls. 6 Hunters Tell Their Stories is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival was built on the uncommon but powerful premise of self-health care. The idea that ultimately it's you who's responsible for your own health. Never before has it been more clear. While governments, health agencies, and medical professionals scramble to create policies and treatments for the masses, the wise amongst us have been busy building the strongest, healthiest, and most adaptable versions of ourselves that we can. Surthrival specializes in time-tested immuno and adaptogenic formulas for modern humans. Right now, until August 27th, all pine pollen products at Surthrival are 20% off their regular price with the coupon code PINE20. That's the word pine with the numbers 20, PINE20. Pine pollen is known as nature's phytoandrogen because it's rich in testosterone, androstenedione, and DHEA. Surthrival's best-selling pine pollen tincture is called Pure Potency, and it's made with wild-crafted pine pollen, stinging nettle root, which frees your body's natural testosterone, and eleuthero root to balance and upregulate your body's natural hormone production. And with its real orange peel, maple syrup, and vanilla bean, it's delicious too. If you or someone you know would benefit from a natural testosterone boost, have a look at Pure Potency. You can find Pine Pollen, Pure Potency, and the rest of the Pine Pollen line at surthrival.com. Hey, thanks for all those 5-star ratings and the incredible reviews over at iTunes. Listen, you only have to do this once to move the needle on how the show gets put in front of new listeners. You just go over to iTunes and hit the 5-star rating, assuming you think that we warrant it, and then write up a short but honest review, and you're done. You're done. Anytime you hear me asking, you can think to yourself, I'm all set. I've already given a little back to support Daniel and the WildFed team and their mission. It's instant gratification. And please know, we read all those reviews, and they mean a lot to us. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed Podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Well, this is an episode I've been working on for a few months now, ever since the spring turkey hunt. In years past, I've spent the season connecting with friends, spending time at a local hunting camp sharing stories, and taking new hunters out for their first hunts. This year was different, though, with the COVID response altering the way people were getting together in person, particularly back in May. So I thought I'd bring the hunting camp to you, getting a handful of friends to share their stories. Each of our guests will be sharing 1 or 2 stories from this year's hunt, and I'll be interspersed throughout talking about the 3 birds I harvested this season too. You're going to hear about hunts from advanced hunters and hunters who just got their first birds this year, hunters in the second part of their life, and even the story of an 8-year-old's first successful turkey hunt. We have voices at the forefront of turkey conservation and those who are instrumental in setting the regulations for when, how, and how many birds can be harvested here in the state of Maine where I live. There's a lot of learning lessons in this episode, so if you're new to turkey hunting, you can expect to pick up a lot of tips, techniques, and tactics that'll better prepare you for next spring. One of the things I really appreciate is the way these turkey calls challenge many of the preconceived notions about what works and what doesn't. For instance, several of these birds are harvested using gobble calls and male turkey fans, despite the fact that the so-called classic spring hunt is usually accomplished by impersonating a hen turkey, or that some of these birds are harvested without decoys at all or later into the day, because again, the classic spring hunt usually employs at least one decoy and happens just after fly down down early in the morning. Another interesting note, while it's often said you should never stalk a gobble or a turkey, with states like Pennsylvania making it outright illegal for safety reasons, they fear a turkey hunter accidentally shooting another turkey hunter. You'll hear several of these turkeys were successfully stalked. By the way, I'm not suggesting that you should ever put yourself at risk to harvest a bird, but rather that it's interesting to hear what hunters are actually doing on the ground versus what we might imagine based on what we read or see in hunting media. So if you're new to the hunt, you might want to add these stories to the conventional wisdom you're picking up from other hunters, books, and magazines. And if you're already a turkey hunter, I think these stories will leave you wishing it was spring again. Having just listened back through them myself, I can hardly wait for the fall season. It's not the same, but it should get me through until next spring. You're also going to hear a bit about what other hunters are doing with their birds, from how they like to break them down and what recipes they use them in, and even a bit about getting unusually large specimens scored for the state record books, which can provide very useful data to biologists and regulators. More than anything, you're going to hear the love and admiration each of us have for this incredible bird and the passion each of us have for sustainably hunting and eating them. And I say all that having just finished a turkey leg salad sandwich. This first story comes from Carter Heath. He lives over in New Hampshire, and he's the New England Regional Director for the National Wild Turkey Federation. You may remember him from a past episode of this podcast. Now, Carter's a very advanced turkey hunter and a really skilled caller, too. He is extremely passionate about turkeys, turkey hunting, and turkey conservation, and uniquely, he makes a full-time living working with, for, and around turkeys and the turkey hunt. You can find him on Instagram as Carter Heath 20.
Given all the extra pressure from all the non-essential folks that are able to be out enjoying the turkey season this year, I've still managed to have a very fulfilling and very good turkey season. You know, usually in a normal turkey season, you would have 2 days where there's pretty heavy pressure, Saturday, Sunday, in states that you can hunt both. And then the rest of the week, there's a lot less pressure. The turkeys kind of chill and stay in a phase. What we've had now is pretty much a constant turkey season where every day is Saturday. I was blessed to come away over here in New Hampshire with 2 really quality birds. Very grateful for that. But it was not strike the call and the bird comes running in and that's it. You had to really work for it. Both birds that I got to interact with and ultimately take were very exciting hunts, but very different hunts. For the first bird, it was the first day of the New Hampshire season, and cold, rainy, wind forecast was pretty grim. I had helped my father build basically a shooting house. You know, he's at a point now where he's not really going to be getting up into tree stands, but still wants to hunt. So we had some scrap lumber and we built this nice little shooting house. And so I thought, well, I know that there have been birds that have been using that general area quite a bit. And I thought, you know, being that it's a rainy day, they're going to be tending to gravitate more towards fields, and that their vision may be playing a bigger role than actual calling, you know, than their hearing in that case, just with the wind and the rain and stuff. So I set up accordingly. I put out a quarter strut Jake right behind a lay-down hen to kind of give the impression that breeding was about to happen. And I called a few times. You know, I got in there at 4 o'clock in the morning and just that decoy set and sat down and just waited in that shooting house. You know, and by shooting house, it's like 4x4. It's not a palatial mansion or anything. But you know, it suited the need. It did exactly what I wanted it to. It broke the wind and it kept the rain from soaking everything I owned. So I made the calls that I felt were appropriate and really wasn't getting a lot of response. I did not hear any gobbles on fly down, which I was a little disheartened at originally, but then about 5:45, I heard him gobble once. And so I knew the game was on. So I sat there, waited. I had a soggy hen come walking by, kind of looked slant-eyed at my decoy set, and then just kept walking on by. Like, I don't want any part of that, and kept moving. Not to humanize them, but I think different people react to different situations different ways. And like, I've seen some hens, all you have to do is just, make a few yelps, and they come unglued and start just calling at you incessantly. And I've watched hens come up and peck decoys. And then other times like this, it was cold, it was rainy. I don't think it was really the time or place to pick a fight. I think she was more than happy just to keep pecking along and moving along. About 8:30, I looked at the very top of the field. It was probably 130 yards away, and he just appeared. He was just there. And I was more fascinated at watching his body language than trying to just hop on a call and just start calling wildly. Because even though it was the first day, it's a piece that gets hunting. It gets pressure. And I knew that it had gotten pressure during the youth weekend. And I had a pretty strong feeling that there had been people out and about with box calls trying to put birds to bed. And so the first few days of the season, birds were call shy. I was finding birds that would just fold up shop and go the other way if you called at them. So I gave this guy some light purrs of encouragement, a couple little clucks, and he would strut. It was just a nice little quiet little purr, and he'd break into strut and pirouette and twist and turn, and then he'd take one step towards me. And then he'd do it all over again and then take another step. So it took him 45 minutes to get to within 30 yards, which was awesome. It was sweet and painful and wonderful all at once. It was agonizing and fantastic. And so he a couple times it looked like his body language was almost that of kind of disinterest, and he'd kind of fold his wings back and kind of take a normal posture and start heading off to what would be my left. And I was like, oh, no, we don't want that. So I'd just give him just a few more soft purrs, very light, and he'd go right back into strut and like change his course and just come right back. He was very, very, very much involved in looking at that both decoys. And so the last probably 40 yards to get him within range was a lot more posturing, was a lot more glaring, looking, strutting. And he got to 30 yards and he strutted, and then he finally gobbled right at that Jake decoy. It was pretty funny. And he got to 28 yards and he high-necked. He put his head right straight up in the air. And as it would be, my safety was off and my red dot was filled with turkey head. I didn't have to move the gun or anything. It was it was perfect. So I squeezed the trigger and it was a very, very quick kill. He seemed more interested in preserving his spot in the pecking order than breeding. Is what I took away from it. When he was very far up in the field, I did a couple of Jake yelps. Kind of a deeper, slower yelp, not aggressive, not loud, but enough so I knew it would carry and he'd be able to hear. It's more of a, instead of a, it's more, and 3 or 4 slow, deep yelps. I've done it by playing closer to the center on a heavier pot call. I've done it with a mouth call where you can kind of take a full breath and like where all the air is right up against your diaphragm, and then just kind of almost drop your chin and just. So that was bird number 1. 10 days later, it was a beautiful sunny day. It was probably the best day weather-wise that we'd had so far that turkey season. It was picture perfect. I saw the bird strutting in a field that I have permission to hunt. It was a bird that I have had history with, shall we say. I had seen him days prior, several different times. Evening time, I'd watch that area, particularly for him, and just good big-bodied bird, very mature, that thick, big head, when those caruncles are just prominent. And so I knew that was his preferred field, if you will, of choice. And it's a back field. It's not one that gets any roadside attention. So I knew that bird was there. I had him several different times with several different folks that I'd taken out. We had that bird on youth weekend. We had that bird on a mentor hunt, and he just had a horseshoe. He was just, last year was his year, and this year was not. And I saw him strutting 240 yards, according to my phone app, across a wide open field. And it was 9:30 in the morning when I finally saw him. And so I got to a position in a stone wall on the far edge of the field, and I had a large split beach between us. So I actually stood up due to the rolling of the hill in the field. I stayed standing for quite a while and just watched him in the binoculars. And I knew he was very call shy. I knew because I'd seen him not only this year a couple times respond adversely to calls, but yet last year he was also pretty much in that same frame. I stood there for probably 20 minutes and didn't even call. I just watched him in the binocs and got a feel for what he had for hens. I got a feel for, and it was like a guilty pleasure. It was a tremendous luxury just to be able to say, okay, I'm going to watch this bird and hope nobody else is out here with me for this hunt. It was a midweek. So when I finally did call, I started off again with some light purrs, couple yelps, and then I put some Jake yelps into it. And when I did the Jake yelps, I got just a little bit more volume, and I could watch instantly where he was strutting back and forth, 90 degrees to me in the back field. And I could do some purrs and he'd just stay strutting. I could do a couple of hen yelps and he'd still strut for his hens. I'd do those Jake yelps and he would stop and turn about face and strut right in my direction, and his head went white. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Kind of, your own little individual science project. I did not directly have a decoy. But what I did have in my turkey vest was just like a fold up photorealistic turkey fan that goes onto a decoy. And just so that I don't lose it, I keep it in there. So having that in mind was cool. So I took my vest off while he was still way across the field and stayed standing and had the gun ready and watched his reactions. And it was 11 o'clock before he started to break and come my way. And he covered 150 yards probably, in good shape. Kind of the zigzag strut, gobble once or twice, because he felt that there was a Jake over here. It ended up helping me, and I was a little concerned at one point, because about 50 or 60 yards straight down in front of, or off to my right, another bird gobbled. And that drove him insane as well. And so as he's now out there at 80 yards, I can hear this other bird responding to my leaf scratching and calling and stuff. And so I'm hearing the other tom spitting drum. He's close. And so I didn't want him to come walking in and alarm putt and throw the whole thing off, because I really wanted to put my tag on the bird that was out in front of me in the field, because that's the grudge bird. So I just start doing instead of doing the sexier hen yelps, I go back to the Jake yelps a little bit. And at 80 yards, he turns and looks my way. And at that point, I'm in some sparse brush. I've got some cover. I've got a stone wall right there. So I just took the fan and I just held it up so that he could see it over the stone wall. And then I dropped it back down, and then I picked it back up and dropped it and flipped it. And then I turned it around and showed the back side of the feathers, photorealistic fans. And, of course, at this point, I feel like I've got the solo show. I'm the only guy that's here from a safety standpoint and all that. I'm just like, okay, I know this is good. I held that up, and he came unglued, and he did something that I haven't seen a bird do before, and I was fascinated by it. But he took his head and he flipped it back on his back feathers and started rolling it side to side so that his snood was slapping his face every time he'd do it, probably a half a dozen times. It was so cool. He'd take that white crown almost and just roll it on his back and just flip his, so his beak was going back and forth on his head. At that point, it took him 3 minutes, if that, to go from 80 to 30 yards. And in the meantime, my gun, I had taken a knee at this point. I wasn't sitting flat. I was on a knee. And my gun, the muzzle was still down as he's now at 40 yards. This whole time he's been looking right at me. So now I'm like, well, it's game on. So the gun came up nice and slow, very microscopic increments. Safety went off and found that sweet spot in the caruncles and squeezed. And that's one of the most impressive impacts I think I've ever seen. He never twitched. It was instantaneous. And every time I take a life, it's not lost on me, the significance of it, especially that bird, because I had a good history with him, and the moment meant a lot. I'm always very grateful, but that I was especially moved by that one. That was really cool. Oh, the best delicious parts. I skin a bird and then take everything. And I have people that use the wings for wing bones. I use the feathers. I've got guys that make arrow, fletching out of the feathers and stuff. The heart, the gizzard comes out. I started collecting the gizzard stones. It's pretty neat. Go in, grab the gizzard, and then you can pull the bag. It's like a little baggie. I was just curious more than anything if he had an affinity for certain shiny stones or, whatever. And a lot of what he had picked out was quartz. Maybe that's just where he ended up, but that was my takeaway. And I may take flack for this, but I'm a kind of a science geek, and that kind of stuff fascinates me. Every little detail, every little bit. So the challenge that I would issue to anybody is take somebody hunting, teach them responsibility and ethics and the right way to turkey hunt, mentor somebody. It doesn't have to be through a full mentor program, although they are a tremendous tool. Taking out a relative or a coworker on a Saturday morning and saying, hey, let's just go out and, I'll show you how this turkey thing works. And, that teaching people the right way to do it is really the key. Something that I often tell people is that word conservation can sometimes get misused. Conservation at its simplest base root is just utilizing resources wisely. Preservation, on the other hand, is not touching at all, not using or protecting fully. To do this for a full-time living is an amazing blessing.
I had 3 really good successful hunts this season. 2 of them were in Maine, and 1 of them was New Hampshire. So the first day, I was at my friend Gordon's place. He bought a private hunting residence, essentially, on a mountain close to me, where he owns a couple thousand acres that he manages just for deer hunting. He's got a small shooting range there to keep rifles sighted in. He's got keeps a lot of toys there, so he's got his ATVs and snow machines and stuff in his man cave kind of building there that he has, which is a massive timber frame barn. It's in high end, beautiful, gorgeous. It's really an epic place. And around here, down south, out west, I think it's more common for people to have these big hunting properties, but out here it's not so common. So anyway, he's got probably 25 deer stands and lots of trail cameras, and he puts out, I think, 7 or 8 tons of deer food every winter. So he's got feeders all over the place, and he's just managing for deer. And it's just him and his son who hunt it, and they don't kill anything with less than, I think, I want to say 7 points. Might even be 8 point. It's 8 pointers there. So he's just managing for deer. To him, turkeys are like a nuisance species. And the idea of hunting turkeys doesn't even make sense to him, right? So he's had this tom that's been coming out every day onto this patch of grass where he's got a deer feeder. And so he'd see the photos every day. He's there to look at, like, how are the racks developing on these deer, which deer made it through the season, how does the population look this year, and he keeps seeing this tom. And he's like, oh yeah, man, please come shoot all the turkeys. That's his attitude about it. So I'd actually gone with him a couple days before. It must have been 2 days before the hunt opened, or maybe even the day before. And he just wanted me to, he's not like, go hunt my property. He's like, come with me. I will show you where you can be. I will show you where you need to go. He brings me in, shows me where he always sees this turkey. We're walking through the woods, and all of a sudden I just see that tom in full display 30 yards away from us. I go like, Gordon, he's right there. My instincts to like hide. Gordon's like, oh yeah, no, he's used to me. I see him all the time. So that hunt kind of felt, I was like, this one's kind of in the bag. But it was opening day. I was like kind of excited to, to not have to be in a place where there's not going to be any other pressure. So anyway, the next morning I get there real early. I get in there, how I like to do it, like way before first light. I want to be set up. So I get up to this patch of grass where I know this turkey comes down, and there's this deer feeder, and I get a quarter strut Jake decoy and a hen decoy out, set them up where I think you'll see them, set up against a tree. Everything's going perfect. I get backed in there. First light comes up. I hear him gobble. I let him gobble a couple times. I give him a light little bit of hen cutting. We go back and forth, but as that's happening, I'm starting to see movement in the timber ahead of me. And I start picking up deer, and they're coming in for their morning feed, basically. So I'm watching, and I'm not wanting them to start stomping and blowing and making any kind of racket that's going to make him think this is not a safe place to come into. So I'm just trying to, now I start going quiet, and the first deer comes out of the woods. And it's this kind of thing where you don't realize how many there are at first. Things start moving and you realize, oh, that's a deer. Oh, that's a deer. That's a deer. And before I know it, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, eventually 12 deer come out of the woods and make their way over to this feeder. And out front is a buck. He's got big old knobby, young velvety antlers growing in. And he's coming in sort of in the lead, and he's just really, I don't know, it's the decoys probably that he's like, something's out of place here. And he's looking right in my eyes, but I can tell he can't figure out that I'm a person. And the wind's good, so it's blowing into my face. So he just keeps coming in, but they're just really not, they're all watching, keying off of him. So I've forgotten about the turkey for now, because I'm just focused on, these deer get to where I could not reach out and touch them, but pretty close. They're inside 5 yards, and they're just coming closer, closer, closer. I'm wearing that First Light Ghillie zip top kind of coverall, and that one that goes over your hat. And because it fits across your hat brim, it shades even what's exposed in your eyes, so you just can't see me. And so they come in, they never end up feeding. They just get to where they're like, something's not right, and they trust their instincts, and he starts to gently stomp, not real aggressive, just gentle, like, I'm not liking this. Eventually they all turn and leave. And what was funny is a couple moments later, this other deer comes out that's like coming to join the party, but came from a different area and was sort of like, where is the vibe I got was like, where is everybody? Anyway, eventually that one leaves too, and I start calling back to the tom. Well, now he's not where he was. I'm hearing him. So he was behind me, behind me, a little to the right. Now he's like 150, 200 yards down to the left, down the hill, because I'm on like the mountainside. So he's completely moved. I'm thinking he's flown down and he's gone somewhere else. So I know no one else is in there. I kind of make a decision. I'm going to leave the Jake decoy. I'm going to scoop up the hen decoy, grab my shotgun, and just start moving real fast to try to like close some distance between us, and I'll call along the way. So I'm going down the hill, and I'm just cruising, trying to close this distance, and there is like the dirt road, but I'm not on the road. I'm like in the wood line, and I'm working my way down that. And eventually I get to a spot where he's calling back, and I'm like, man, he's real close. I need to stop moving now, tuck in. So I get behind this boulder and I call again, and all of a sudden just this like explosion down from the trees. It's so funny because I'm calling to a tom turkey and I see this explosive movement and I think, oh, that's a crow. And then my brain switches again and goes, oh, it's a turkey vulture, because I see the black kind of body and the red bald head. And then it like clicks, no, that's the tom you're talking to, obviously, right? But somehow I'm just not expecting him to come from a tree. I'm expecting him to be on the ground. So this was interesting to me. I've mentioned it to a few people. Carter Heath told me he's heard of it before, seen it, but this bird left a roost and went to another tree. Anyway, so this turkey comes busting through and he lands on that dirt road, and I'm off the road probably 10, 15 feet behind a boulder. And I just keep calling to him. Now, I want to say like my trip down to him was full commando. It was like belly crawling, jumping through things, going over rocks. Like that was the most intense part of the hunt, was I sort of snaked my way down to him. I wasn't sure where he was, but I could hear him. So trying to like, stay behind things so that he doesn't pick up my movement and get down to him fast. So that was like the funnest part of the hunt. And then I get behind this rock, I see him fly down, and I see he's walking right up towards me. And I just decide, well, I'll just hold my shotgun up. I brace it against the rock, so I'm looking down through the sights. The sights are lined up, and I'll just wait for him to walk right into my sight picture. So I'm just waiting, and like I saw him, and then he's like, now I can't see him because I'm behind the rock. And then all of a sudden, there he is, and he's just right in the sights. Bang! And he just hit hard. It wasn't one of those like, oh, he might get away type deals. It was like, hit him, and then I could just take my time. And actually, I had left my Jake decoy, brought the hen decoy, and at one point before I got to him, I set up again, put out the hen decoy, realized he was further, ditched her, and ended up just having a mouth call and my shotgun when I got this bird. So I like when that happens, when I don't need a lot of gear. I like to bring it all because you just don't know what's going to happen. Like a lot of different things can happen, but this was just mouth call and a shotgun. So I got my first bird and felt great about the bird. He was 20 plus pounds, just over 20, 10-inch beard, just like a really great tom. But that thing of being like where the feeders are and knowing this bird has got no pressure, and, I didn't feel like it was a real like special hunt in the sense of the work that I put in. But, it was kind of nice to have that at the same time, have that like piece of property nobody else is hunting. So anyway, that was great. I was tagged out for the day, and that was Saturday. And I think I drove around a little bit looking to see if, because sometimes I'll tag out on the first day if I can find a second bird. But that day it was getting hot already, and I think I drove around, I looked a little bit, but I was more excited to just kind of go home and chill out, get some sleep, because I'd been getting up early to scout all week too, And that's the thing, is the week before, I don't find it super valuable to be scouting for weeks, but I like to put in a solid, week of scouting beforehand. So knowing the next day was Sunday, there was no hunting, I was kind of excited to just like go home, clean that bird, and get some sleep, and then focus on Monday morning when, I was no longer going to be in my friend's private area. Now I got to go out and hunt amongst the common folk, where there's a lot more competition and a lot more, the birds are they've been hearing shotguns in the woods all week, hearing dudes stomp around, hearing a lot of fake hen calls, seeing decoys. And so now it's a matter of, can I get my second bird on day 2, which is the Monday.
These next stories come from my friend Christy Holmes. Now, she's a Maine resident and works here as a civil engineer, but she's been developing an online persona as a prominent hunter and angler in the state of Maine, writing articles for hunting and fishing publications. And she's been featured in a lot of media too, as well as ads for major hunting manufacturers or for her sponsors. She's a registered Maine hunting and fishing guide and the founder of Maine Women Hunters. Her first story's about her partner Travis's hunt, and the second one's about a very special bird she harvested while out solo.
I didn't grow up hunting or fishing, and growing up, it's it's really important to have role models. And as a female, you know, in the hunting and fishing world, at least when I was growing up, I didn't see any females doing it. I grew up in Machias, Maine. You know, I've had a lot of positive role models in my life. I just am passionate about it and like sharing what I'm up to with people, and get a lot of positive feedback from parents who have daughters that I guess I'm like a role model for them. You know, you don't have to give up your girliness just to enjoy the outdoors. So with this particular bird, I had known about the area because I'd hunted across the street, and I knew there were birds over there, but where I heard that they don't give permission at this farm. So why bother asking? Well, then I met a fellow at the gym, and we were chatting, and he's like, oh, I live next to this farm in Wyndham. And I'm like, oh, I know where you live. You've got some turkeys there. And he was like, yeah, you know, if you want to come turkey hunting. And I'm like, okay, see you opening day. So I was pretty pumped about this spot to be like, have permission abutting this farm. And he said they go to his property. He said they're there all the time. Monday rolls around and Travis is with me, and I'm like, okay, you shoot first. But if there's two, you know, I'll shoot too. It's your turn. I'm working from home, so it's easier for me to go out every day than you. So we park at my friend's house, and we set up, and we hear them gobbling. They're like 200 yards away probably. And then I hear this hen calling, and I'm like, oh no, this kind of sounds like another hunter. Hasn't moved in a while. So then the sun comes up enough, and I'm like, yep, we can see enough. There is a blind with decoys 100 yards away from us. And I'm like, this is kind of funny. I parked at my friend's house. Who knows where this guy parked? It's not like a field where you're like, oh, someone got there before me. Let me keep going. So here we are set up 100 yards away from each other. And the turkeys are at the other end of the field. And he's calling and a lot. And we're like, well, there's no point. If we start calling, it's going to be like too much calling. So we're just kind of like, I wonder what will happen, you know? And we had 2 hen decoys out and a tom decoy with a real fan on it. And he's got 3 hens, but he's doing all the calling. I'm like, well, if we call, that's way too much calling. And the turkeys are at the other end of the field. So we're like, well, it's in our general area. So he gets a tom to come up to like the middle, the crest of the field. And I'm like, man, this is going to be an interesting scientific experiment. Like, will the tom go to him with 3 hens, or will he come to us with 2 hens and a tom? And he starts moseying his way. And then I do a little bit of calling because I'm like, well, you know, I gotta like pull him this way. And he ended up coming to our decoy. So Travis shoots it. And then we're in the blind, and I'm like, man, that guy's gonna be a little bit ticked. So he came out of his blind, and he was the nicest guy. His name was Wayne, and he was so nice. And he was like, oh, can I see it? And he said he got one there opening day, so he already had one. And he was like so nice. So I went back the next day, same spot, but they roost in the area I don't have permission to hunt. So I can't like really set up too close to them. I'm kind of just like, well, you know, hopefully they come close enough and come over. But I did have, it must have been a boss hen, because she came over and started attacking my hen decoy. And I had just my Avian X decoy on this side of the wood line. And then I had my tom and a different hen on this side. So she could only see my lone hen. And she's facing away from this boss hen who comes running. And she first attacks with her feet, which turns the decoy 180 degrees, and now she's facing the other way. And then she starts pecking the head, and it was quite entertaining. I took a video of it. But then the next day, I was like, okay, I'm going to try no tom decoy. So we just had 2 hens out, and she was nearby. She didn't come over, but she was like clucking up a storm. I have never heard... I mean, it may not have been the same one. There was a group of hens, and one of them would not shut up. She was like going nuts, and I'm assuming it was because she saw my decoys over there. It was I took a video of that too. It was pretty funny. So a couple days later, I've watched them enough. I've been unsuccessful enough that I'm like, okay, they like this area. They go over to this wood line, and I don't know what they do in there. If some of them have a nest in there or what, but they hang out over there, the hens. And sometimes the toms are with them. And there are 2 toms that I usually see with them. So that morning, they all were nearby, could see my decoys. And this one of the toms couldn't care less about what was going on. He did not give me the time of day. But he was just up strutting and strutting. The other tom was pretty interested. He was gobbling at me. And he got to about 70 or 80 yards. And he was coming in slowly. And then, like, behind me, like, a dump truck made a noise at the neighbor's house behind me. And then it, like, spooked him back to his hen. So I was like, oh, man. So I'm pretty stubborn. So I sat there all day. The hens would walk right into my decoys, right? And I'm like, why can't you bring your boyfriend? And so eventually, it's getting late in the day. It's like 5 o'clock, 5:30. So I take my rangefinder and my 12 gauge. I'm crawling. And this is, I don't know if I want to give away my spot, but it's a Christmas tree farm. And these Christmas trees are about 3 to 4 feet tall, which is pretty perfect for stalking a turkey. But I know he has hens with him, and I'm like, I know I'm going to get busted because he's got like 5 hens. So what are the odds, But I was like, whatever, it's nothing to lose. I'm just crawling. I'm not calling. So I'm just crawling. And 3 to 4 foot Christmas trees, you can conceal yourself, but like a tom that's fanned out, you're going to see it. So I'm crawling, and then I can see him, and I'm like, okay, there he is. Crawl a little bit more. Okay, run 1 row closer, and then I crawl down the row. And then at one point, some hens bust me, and I'm like, oh, shoot. They kind of speed walk off, and I look, and the tom's still there, not phased. And I got watching him, and I'm ranging him, and I'm like, oh, he's 70 yards, still too far. And he's going in circles with a hen. So he's trying to breed a hen. And the 2 of them were going in circles. Every time I saw him, they'd do a half circle, stop for a sec. Half circles. And he would use his wing to kind of get her in. So I'm like, this is pretty good because he's distracted. He's not paying attention. So I go 1 row closer. Okay, now I'm 60 yards. And I'm like, okay, if I can get a little closer. But I'm also thinking, God, what if I shoot the hen on accident? Like they're moving in circles close to one another. So I finally get 50 yards. I'm like, okay, this is close enough. I get down in prone position, and I can see where he turns, and I'm like, okay, I need him to like not have the hen nearby. And I don't know if he kind of saw me, but something like got him out of his groove. He kind of stopped going in a circle and was like, paused for a couple seconds, and that's when I shot him. He flopped right over. Well, I walk up to him, and I'm like, what do I do first? I guess I check his spurs first, and I'm like, whoa, those are pretty long. Like, I'm going to take a picture, send him to my friend Jeff. So I text him to my friend Jeff, and Jeff's like, whoa, that's a really solid bird. Like, I've shot 30 birds in my life, and only 3 of them, have had spurs like that. He's like, I'm coming over to your house. So I'm like, okay. So I get him home, and Jeff's over, and he's like raving about how big this turkey is and how it's such a solid turkey. And we weigh him on the fish scale. On that scale, he weighed like 24.5 pounds. I decide to get him scored because I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to regret it. I took him over to a guy that night, and on his scale, he weighed 23.4 pounds. His beard was 9.4 inches. One of his spurs was 1.5 inches, and his other spur was a little bit less. I shot my second bird last year on the last week. I took a Jake, and after I got his meat out, I was like, I'm not going to shoot Jakes anymore. Because toms are just so much more meat. It's like twice as much meat, and I'm like, I'm not shooting Jakes anymore. My turkey scored 70.4. Which is really high for a typical turkey. They need to be 60, I guess, to score. I learned all about this. So they have to be 60 to score. A 70 or above is considered a trophy. And I think it will land in the top 15 typical birds in the state of Maine history, all time. We had a lot of turkey meat. So we did 2 pot pies. We did nuggets, fried nuggets. We did like wrapped in bacon on the grill. With their legs, we did like buffalo turkey leg dip. And then we made these barbecue cheese toasted turkey sandwiches that were really good. Turkey hunting is like very approachable for a beginner, but I didn't get my first turkey till I was a couple years in. Since then, I think I've punched both my main tags every year. I love turkey hunting. I'm not going to freeze my butt off, which is a big one. It's in May, so there's nothing else to compete as far as hunting goes. You've just had all winter to recharge your batteries from waking up early deer hunting or whatnot. And you're like gung-ho to get out there. And you don't have to worry about your scent. I mean, you can just sit there all day with one decoy. Like, you don't have to buy a bunch of gear, just camo and a shotgun and maybe one decoy. There's a ton of action. Even if you're not successful, you probably heard turkeys, you saw turkeys. So it's unlike deer hunting where you can sit all day and literally see nothing. Turkey hunting, you usually see some cool stuff.
These next two stories come from Justin King, who is a butcher by trade and moved here to Maine just a few years back from the state of Maryland. Now, Justin's into the entire wild food lifestyle. He hunts, fishes, gathers, and cooks. He's an adult onset hunter who really struggled the first few years here trying to learn how to hunt on his own. Now, last year he drew a moose tag, and I got to join him as his sub-permittee. That hunt really broke the seal for him, and this spring, with his two first successful turkey hunts, it's reinforced his personal identity as a hunter. It's been awesome watching his success, and I'll admit, he really surprised me this season, tagging out by day 2 of the season. You can find him on Instagram as @Justin_hunt and gather.
My family, or at least elements of my family, were big hunters. My immediate family weren't so big, so I got out a few times, predominantly whitetail as a youth, but never really got into it. The biggest barrier, and it's probably the pretty common one, is just getting acclimated to a firearm, learning how to shoot, understanding the operation of a firearm. That whole gamut was absolutely the biggest barrier for me. Especially when we first got up here, it was absolutely just completely unguided. I had no idea where I was going, why I was going there. I was basically picking up a gun and walking through the woods and hoping that a deer just happened to be standing in front of me at one point. I can't really explain what happened or how it clicked, but something just sort of occurred, particularly this past fall, where it's just the ideas and the concepts started to become more than just concepts. They became reality. I started to understand movement. I started to understand the things I was really needing to look for in order to accomplish what I was after. It was kind of like getting towards the end of the learning curve, and it just started to click. The ideas became practical at that point. Right off the bat this year, I learned a lot about what I'm looking for and sort of the different tactics and strategies that there are and that people are using that are effective. So I spent a lot more time scouting, basically from the fall on. I spent the whole winter just paying attention, even if it wasn't active, just paying attention as I was driving about where I'm seeing birds, where's their bird sign, every day for the most part, and kind of got keyed in while doing that to a relatively large flock that was frequenting a particular area. Kind of kept my eyes on them and knew where they were going to be. So, anywhere if I was going somewhere new or just day-to-day commuting, just watching where the birds are and where they're moving and just paying attention and noting it every day. So kind of a elongated scouting season throughout the whole winter. But yeah, and then it was different for me this year because I just felt so much more confident because I'm still kind of riding the high of the moose at this point. And my freezer is still full of moose even at this point. I mean, we've eaten through a lot of it, but man, I still have a lot of meat down there. So the pressure, I don't want to say it was off, but it was different. So it was just, I felt so much more confident going through this season. And I went out the night before opening day. So on Friday evening, right at dusk, right where I knew or thought I knew there was going to be birds. I pulled some owl calls just with my mouth, just hooting into the trees. And I had 3 different birds gobble back. So I was like, okay, it's like, I know where I'm going to be at 4:00 in the morning. It was a lot different than years previous where I was literally just wandering into the woods or driving around hoping there were birds in a field near me. So having like that place that I'm going to go and understanding how the birds are likely to move from where they were roosted along a particular ridge down towards a field, just like knowing those sort of behavioral patterns that they're going to have was just quintessential. Like it made all the difference in the world for me. I went into the woods that morning being like, I am going to get one of these birds. It's almost inevitable because I'm in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. It was a super cool feeling. This year I was hunting with a 20 gauge. I have a Mossberg 500 in the 20 gauge. I had a decoy with me. I did not set it up that morning. It was with me in a sack. I just opted to try to call and get into their travel path before I was trying to do any decoy. So it's just right after legal light. One of the birds walks higher up the ridge than where I'm sitting, and I'm calling at him. He's interested, and I get quiet for a while to see if I can get him to come down a little bit on me, and he actually takes off and flies directly over top of me, right off the ridge, down into this field. So I assume I spooked him. Not really sure if he saw me. Was trying to be still, obviously. The second bird wouldn't work in. He was right near where they had been roosted. So I moved my setup just a little bit, got into like a rock ledge and got myself behind some rock. And I actually managed, the bird that flew over must have still been interested in what was going on, because he starts gobbling and then coming back from where he had landed and immediately starts walking up to this rock ledge where I'm sitting right out of the field, just strutting, blowing and spitting, coming right at me. He gets absolutely no stop. The adage on a string comes to mind. Tunnel vision kind of kicked in where all I can really see is like his head changing color in front of me as he's coming up out of the bottom. I took the shot, hit him. He immediately dropped, was kicking around as they do. And I remember, I thought it was funny, but I had like enough of a conscious decision that I like picked up my slate, put everything in my pocket, made sure that I wasn't leaving anything where I was at. And then I jumped over the rock ledge, ran down to him and got on top of him so he couldn't get up. I honestly, I was utterly shocked because with my track record in the previous years, I was like, there's no way this is going to work like this. And then just to be standing there with this animal and being like, holy crap, like that was it. Like I did it. You know what I mean? It was kind of like amazing. I was like, whoa, all right. So that paid off. I did the thing. So I had to work on that Sunday. So I ended up going to work being like, man, I want to go scouting again. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to be there. I was like ready to get back out after it. I did a little bit of scouting on the way home. Didn't find anything. I went back out that evening to a bunch of different spots and did some calling, trying to get some reactions in it. Contrary to the night before, like I didn't hear a single thing that night in a bunch of spots where I had seen birds. So I was like, I went to bed Sunday night kind of disheartened, where I was like, oh man, it was a fluke, So yeah, it was a little bit different of a setup. The flock that I had been seeing seemed to have broken up or moved on, because I hadn't seen that same flock. Even though I got that tom there, I just hadn't seen as much activity there as I had been seeing. Even that whole day after I got the first bird, when I cruised back by there a few times and there wasn't any activity, so I didn't have that like, well, I know there's going to be birds here feeling anymore, which was kind of different. So I went to bed a little bit worried. So I started a hair later. It was getting light out when I got onto the road, and I kind of took the different route this time, where I was doing some driving, trying to locate birds instead of knowing where they were. And I was probably 20 minutes into looking and went past on this dirt road, like a logging drop where they had put down all the logs in the past year. And there was a very large tom walking through the center of it. Just right off the side of the road, watched me go by. I went by him twice just to make sure I understood where he was going, make sure that I was somewhere that I could access legally, make sure there were no homes or anything around that I was unaware of, just to make sure I was safe, because I'm about to going to the woods with a shotgun in an area that I'm not 100% familiar with. I was probably 200 yards down the road on a pull off before I pulled over. I was like, you know what? As I went by the first time and saw him, he jerks around and like watches my truck go by. Like he knows something's not right here. I was probably 200 to 250 yards down the road from him before I stopped and got out and then went into the woods and, circumvented the distance, basically followed a creek bed so that I was kind of below sight line as I was moving just to make sure he didn't see me. And then I set up where I was up against like a fallen white pine. I was rested against the root ball with the tree itself basically in front of me so that I had like a makeshift blind, so to speak. And then I started calling and he came in on the calls again. He started spitting and drumming. I can hear him, but I couldn't see him through the brush. And I'm doing the whole shaky shotgun resting on the white pine, trying not to move, trying to guess like where he was going to travel just based on like the topography and then the brush. Same exact feeling where I was like, really? Like this guy's coming at this again. And I'm doing the same thing. I just a little bit of calling on the slate call, just enough to get him moving in my direction and then shut up for a little while, be quiet, get him, strutting. I probably called at him. No decoy, just calls. I probably called 4 times throughout it's probably a half an hour interaction with this bird, and he came right. I mean, it couldn't have been any more perfect because he came directly out of the brush, exactly where I thought he was going to come out, and my sights were literally like right on his neck when he came out. He came right into it. I was like, did I just read this like right? Like he literally followed the topography through the brush the way that I thought he was going to, and he quite literally just like pops out of some like low hanging spruce, and he's just there. He gobbles, and I pull the trigger, and he immediately drops. Same thing. I just sat there, and I was like, 2 times, like I've hunted a grand total of an hour and 10 minutes at this point, and I'm done? What am I going to do with the rest of May? But it was awesome. And he ended up being an even bigger bird. He was heavier than the first. He has a 13-inch beard, little shy of 1.5 inch spurs on the back, nice and rounded and pointed. Completely fooled by my novice self sitting in the woods. I plucked the first bird instead of skinning it just to see what that's like, and, split the breasts in half, got the legs, thighs off, got the wings off, and put everything in the freezer. Well, we ate 1 breast that night, but yeah, it was pretty simple. If there's like an entry animal to butchery, wild turkey is definitely going to be the thing you can get started on and get your hands wet in the processing world. It's pretty simple. The seams of where you take things off basically present themselves. So I skinned the second one just out of basically pure curiosity, just to see what I liked better. I would say, just as like a purist, so to speak, I prefer the plucked skin on bird, but I haven't had a great amount of time to play with it culinarily. I still have the legs in the freezer with the skin on and all that, and I anticipate using the legs for like pulled meat, like taco meat or something like that, in which case it's going to be completely worthless to have the skin on, but I may end up smoking a set. It's definitely easier and to skin the bird out. It makes a lot of that easier. It makes the butchery a little bit easier because the seams are extremely evident at that point and all that. And the effort of plucking a turkey is kind of mind-boggling. Their feathers do not give easily. So even on the bird that I plucked, I ended up skinning like the ends of the wings out because I just could not get those things out. It's like I'm gonna smoke or braise these wings off anyway. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll see as time goes on. I have 1 set of legs with skin on, 1 set skinless, and I'll probably taco meat the skinless ones or something like that. Do some carnitas. Maybe I'll smoke the set with the skin on. Do like a pressure cooker smoker combination to try to get them nice and tender and see how that lands, and then that'll kind of direct where I go with the butchery for next year. But just kind of curious as to which one will work best for me. I've always been like the purist, like my shanks have never been ground kind of guy. Like it was a surprisingly large amount of meat on them. They're large, but that doesn't always equate to meat, but man, as I was cutting the first one up, I was just like, whoa, like these breasts are like really impressive. It's that kind of weird thing that happens where people want to call you a trophy hunter because you're waiting for the biggest animal in the woods without kind of realizing that the biggest animal in the woods is the one that has the most food walking around on it. It's something to be said for getting out as early into a season as you possibly can before they become witty to what's going on. Stillness is way more important than I think I could have ever comprehended, particularly with turkeys. Every little minute movement that you make is just insane. Like adjusting the barrel on your shotgun to point at them a little bit differently is enough to get them to run the other way. That was like my big takeaway, was just understanding just how still I had to be, and just no movement. It was interesting. It was kind of enlightening, and it felt good to do it. That might have been the best part.
Hey, we'll get back to the interview in just a moment, but first, I'm a big believer in using saunas to improve and maintain my health. In fact, I've had a clear light sauna in my home for almost 10 years now, and it's one of the ways I practice self-health care. I use it to detoxify myself from the industrial, chemical, and environmental pollution that's all around us, and to keep my immune system supple and strong. It's relaxing, meditative, and an incredible way to ward off aches and pains, increase recovery speed, and can even help with weight loss too. Clearlight saunas utilize ultra-low EMF, full-spectrum infrared heaters. These saunas are easy to assemble yourself or with a friend, and they make a size for any home or apartment. They're also gorgeous, made from natural, eco-certified woods. Mine's cedar, and I absolutely love the way it looks and smells. My sauna is like a refuge for me. It's a quiet place where I can go to restore myself mentally and physically. But it's got modern tech too, including a Bluetooth-enabled sound system so I can listen to music or podcasts like this one, and chromotherapy lighting systems that allow me to customize my healing experience. After 10 years, I can personally attest to the quality, ease of use, and the benefits of Clearlight saunas. In a world where self-health care is becoming more and more important, saunas are becoming less of a luxury and more of a health investment. To learn more about Clearlight saunas, go to healwithheat.com and use the coupon code WildFed. It'll get you $500 off your order, or you can use it to get an additional $100 off any of their sale prices. Again, it's healwithheat.com, and the coupon code WildFed gets you $500 off your order. Best of all, shipping's free inside the continental United States. Don't you think it's time you had a sauna at home? Check out Clearlight saunas at healwithheat.com. Now, back to the show.
So my second hunt, 2 days had gone by. I probably slept in on Sunday. I'm trying to remember if on Monday morning I had a setup or if I just went out for the day. Because the first day at Gordon's, I knew where I wanted to be. I knew what tree I would be leaning against. I don't remember having a plan on the Monday, but I can't remember now. Either way, I ended up in a place that I've been before, some fields tucked into the woods, and I had pulled up to this roadside area and just called, and I heard a gobbleback way up on the hill. And I know what's up there. I know there's fields up there and that there's birds. So I decided to make my way up through the woods, got behind a rock wall and peeked over. And this is a good story actually. So yeah, it was a little later in the morning. It wasn't, 5 a.m. or something. It was a little later. I made my way up through the woods, and I only see one bird at this point. I see a tom, and he's in full display, and I'm calling, and he's calling back. Now, I've brought with me, I have a decoy. I think I just have a hen, but I have a turkey fan, a real beat-up one, too. Every year, I harvest a bird, take the fan of the tom, pin it out, salt it, let it cure, so that I have it for the next year. But I've been saving them up, because I just keep using the same ratty beat-up fan, and it doesn't seem to have any negative effect. So I just threw it in one of my decoy bags. So I've got 2 bags slung on my shoulder. One has got the decoy in it. One has the fan. And then I'm carrying shotgun, a mouth call, and a gobble call. So I get to where I can see this tom, but he's not liking me. He's looking over at me, and I'm feeling like he's kind of getting a feeling of a threatening feeling from me. So I'm just trying to play it cool, and I'm talking back to him, and all of a sudden I start to hear my phone making some racket in my pocket, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Somehow it activated I don't know if it was on airplane. I don't remember what mode it was in. I think I had it silenced, but anyway, I'm calling 911. And so I, having done some stuff in the emergency world over the years, I know that they've got to call back. Like I need to respond, but I'm looking at this tom. So I take that fan and I just hold it up because I got to move so much, and I get the phone out. Now this tom's probably 250 yards away, so he's not real close, but they've got such good eyes. He knows where these sounds are coming from. He can see the sort of movement going on. So I just get on the phone. I'm trying to be as quiet as I can, and they've already called me twice. They've left messages, and so I'm like, they're going to initiate something if I don't call back. So I call back. And I'm trying to do this as quick as possible, but I get the regional center, and then they say, no, we need to pass you on to another center. So I get passed from call to call till I finally get somebody on the line who is like, well, sir, I'm sorry, but I need your name. So I give my name, and he's like, well, I need your address. Give him the address. I'm trying to like speed this up. He's like, what address are you at right now? Physical address. It's like, I'm hunting, man. I'm in the woods. I was like, to be honest with you, I'm looking at a turkey right now. And I did not mean to initiate this, and I'm like in the middle of a hunt, so whatever we can do to like speed this up, because that turkey's looking right at me. And he goes, you're not going to believe this, but I've done the exact same thing, he says. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm in good company. So we just go through the motions of everything he has to do, get whatever he need me to sign off. I get the phone back in my pocket. Now this bird kind of crests up over the hill of a field. I can't see him anymore. So I work my way up through the wood line, out into the field, and I kind of just belly crawl my way until where I can finally see him again. And when I look down, it's probably 4 toms in display and a pile of hens, and they're all just together moving through this area. And I'm thinking, how am I going to call them up to where I am? There's some houses down that way, and I can't be going down in there and shooting, So I've got to get them over to me. So I'm calling, and I'm picking up my decoy and just kind of holding it up on the horizon, trying to like show a bird because they're hundreds of yards away. And slowly the flock, this goes on for like an hour. Slowly the flock starts to make its way in my general direction, but not quickly or anything. It takes a long time. I spent quite a bit of time in the field. And I'm in like a little island of trees in a field. So if you can picture an area where farmers are maintaining this big, massive field, but they've left an area where there's now a crop of rocks and a few trees. So I'm kind of tucked in there. Eventually they start getting close, and I'm getting kind of impatient, and the day's getting on. And I just decide I'm going to go for it. They get to where they're in like side of 150 yards. So I just lay down on my belly. I hold out the fan. I've got my Benelli, my shotgun, which I'm on all fours. So what I have to do is slide the shotgun up, grab the decoy bag with all my stuff in it, push that forward, kind of crawl up a few steps behind the fan, and then repeat the whole thing. Slide the shotgun, slide the bag, crawl up on my knees, slide the shotgun, slide the bag. And every once in a while I stop and I gobble call. And what I'm noticing is these toms are all with hens, so they're not, it's like they're already with the ladies. So me having like a fake lady voice is not really getting their attention. They're like, yeah, right. I'm already with the real deal, bro. Like, I don't care about your calls. But when I gobble, they get real annoyed, and they start to perk up, and they start walking in my direction, and they're displaying, and they're not liking the idea of a rival tom coming in. And this has happened to me before when I'm behind a fan. I've noticed that the hens are who want to come check it out. It's like, well, who's this guy? So I'm doing that, and a hen is coming to me. Now, what ends up happening is that hen, who I think's already been bred that morning, so she's kind of done with these toms anyway, she's coming in my direction, and she gets inside 20 yards to me. She's just over my left shoulder, and the rest of the birds that I'm trying to get to are 12 o'clock to me, so she's at more like 9 o'clock. And I'm realizing they're going to get down into the woods, and I'm going to lose them. So I need to move quickly. I don't want to crawl anymore. I'm going to like stand up and just hold the fan in front of me and kind of hustle over to them. But I know when I do, she's going to see me stand up. She's looking at me from the side. She's not getting the subterfuge of the fan anymore. And I'm like, well, let's just see what happens. So, and I've had this experience where I've been really brazen behind the fan before, and just the level to which it deceives them is remarkable. So it's like they can't imagine this level of deception. So I just stand up. And she looks at me, and she doesn't like it. She pucks a little, but not loud enough for anyone else to hear. And she doesn't run off. She just sort of walks a little more rapidly away. But she still like can't get that it's how could I possibly be a person behind a fan? This makes no sense. So she doesn't really alert them. And the other toms are getting real white-headed and their heads going blue, white. They're getting real aggressive. They're just not liking me being there. So I just keep edging up. Now there's a rock wall between us. And so I'm like, I'm going to hustle right up to that rock wall, and I'm going to drop down out of sight. And I'm just going to keep picking the fan up over the rock wall and see if I can get one to come in range. So at this point, there's 3 toms, and they're all about the same. They're like all the same size, same beards, everything's the same. So I don't have one that I'm particularly interested in. I'm like, will one come closer? So this goes on for a little bit. I'm behind finally the rock wall. I hustle over there, and they're alarmed, but also aggressive. And I can just feel how the aggressiveness is overcoming the alarm, at least for this one bird, who's edging closer and closer to me. And the other 2, the feeling I'm getting from them is, come on, man, let's get out of here. This isn't our fight. And he's like, no, I'm not having this guy around here. You know, that's kind of what I'm getting off of it. So he keeps inching in closer, and I eventually sort of poke up, but I'm behind some small, maybe like 5-6 inch diameter maples. And I just post my hand up C-clamp against the tree and lay my shotgun on my hand. So I'm looking down the sights, and I'm slapping the gobble call against my body to get a gobble sound. And he's just coming in, and I just think like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this. He's getting closer. And finally he just gets right in the range, and, you know, blah, I shoot, and these turkeys just going everywhere at that point. You know, the toms who were with him, they take off into the woods. Some fly up. The hen that was over my shoulder, I hear her sort of take off through the woods. Like everybody scatters, and he's just doing the kind of body shake on the ground. And so that was day 2, and I run over and grab him, and I just thought, like, the underutilization of this. People are so focused on doing the hen calls and so focused on enticing a tom with a hen, which is very effective. But I have had I'd say I'm at least 50-50 now in all the birds I've harvested doing male calls and being behind the fan. I mean, it's as effective in my anecdotal experience. So I was like, there's another one for the fan. And it's a more exciting hunt, in my opinion, because it's active and you get to like chase the bird down a little bit. And I find I have a personality where that's more exciting. So that was a really cool one. So he was about the same. He was 20 pounds, 10-inch beard, kind of the same deal, like same size as the first bird. They could have come out of a mold. Anyway, very cool. So now it's the second hunt, and I'm 2 for 2. This year I thought I would do what Carter Heath mentioned to us, which was, you know, skin the bird rather than pluck it. And I got home and I skinned this bird out, and I had in the fridge the bird from the 2 days before that I had harvested aging in the refrigerator. So I got them both skinned out and kind of put a little pressure on the pelvis to pop the ball socket joint of the femur out of the acetabulum a little bit. So once that does, the body lays a little flatter. And I put them on a rack side by side because they were about the same size. And what was really neat about these 2 birds is the one that came from near that deer feeder had a very white breast, and the one that came out of the woods had a very red breast. And so it's the photo is almost kind of shocking when you look at the 2, like very, very different pigmentation. My guess is just that the bird who was in the field had been eating a lot more insects and invertebrates and things that are probably high in, you know, vitamin A and things that have pigment, whereas the one that was real white in the breast, I think, was probably eating a lot of the deer pellets out of Gordon's deer feeder, you know, stuff that had fallen to the ground. So that's my guess, is that this bird was a little more naturally fed.
This next story is really special. It comes from Kevin Merrow of tradgeeks.com. Kevin's a chiropractor by trade, and he and his family live on their own farm. But he's also a traditional archer, hunting with longbows and recurves. He's partnered with companies like Sitka, Yeti, Mountain Ops, and Maven Optics. Now, his son Finn is 8 years old today, but he's been taking him hunting since he was 2. And this is the story of Finn's first successful turkey hunt. You can find Kevin on Instagram as @kevin.merrow.
I hunt a lot, and my wife is exceptional for letting me do that, but I take Finn with me a lot. And I've been taking him in the woods and hunting with me since he was 2, believe it or not. And if that's a half-hour hunt or a 2-hour hunt, it doesn't matter to me as long as he's with me. Last year was his first year turkey hunting, so he was 7 last year. opening morning, he missed a big long beard in the food plot right above my house that I have kind of designed specifically for turkey on my farm. And he never got an opportunity after that. So he's pretty worked up. It stuck with him pretty hard. So fast forwarding to this year, I took him out on Youth Day, it opens up a Saturday before the regular season opens to the public. And it's one day. So I took him out on the farm and I ended up calling in 5 jakes, and he missed a jake at 10 yards. 10 yards is super close. So, that pattern's really tight. So as you shoot that gun out, that shotgun pattern opens up. And I think because it was so close, any little fine movement he can miss. And then later that morning, he missed another bird that I called in for him up on top of the hill. So because of all these misses, Finn is just beside himself. He's Dad, I'm a terrible hunter. And I say, buddy, you're not a terrible hunter. There's mentally something happening there. You're getting too excited. You need to calm down, and getting to the point where I'm like, almost like, oh, we'll just wrap it up for the year. Next year, we'll get back into it. And, and my good friend messaged me and said, hey, why don't you bring Finn over to the property? We have some longbeards coming out into the field. So I asked him, I said, do you want to go, buddy? Yeah, absolutely. I want to go. I said, all right. So we got up early that morning and went out to our friend's farm there. And it was like the picture perfect turkey hunting morning, low wind, just a little chilly in the morning, but going to warm up through the day. And in Pennsylvania, our season's a little later, which I think it's really good for the turkey population because, a lot of the hens are already bred and on nests. But it's really hard to hunt an eastern bird in Pennsylvania because of that. The turkeys gobble on the roost, but then they're henned up through the day, which is, they're with a lot of hens during the day. And if they're already with hens, why would they want to come to another hen? But it was a picture perfect morning, and the birds were gobbling and probably 300-400 yards away, and they sounded like jakes, and the jake's gobble is kind of just a little, it's not as loud or long. It's kind of chopped up. And so they were jakes and they're far away. But my buddy Curtis sent me a message, and he said, don't worry, they'll be coming to this food plot at some point, which is in the middle of about 200 acres and at the highest point. So naturally, turkeys just love to go to that spot, this opening in the middle of the forest, So we're sitting there, and it wasn't 20 minutes later, and he said, big longbeard just stepped into the food plot. And I kind of peek out through the blind, and I see this bird go into full strut. And so I start calling to him, and he stayed out in the middle of this food plot on the highest point of the food plot where he could see everywhere. And I tried everything in my power to get that bird to come over to, which I had just 2 hen decoys set up. And he strutted back and forth out there for 40 minutes. So you can just picture Finn's in the blind, like just shaking like a leaf, like, Dad, is this going to happen? I'm like, bud, I don't know. And I'm thinking through my mind, like, a real hen's going to come to the food plot, or these jakes are going to come in here and try beating them up, and this isn't going to work out. And I'm thinking this in my head, and there's Finn shaking. I'm like, bud, just imagine that this isn't going to happen. There's a slight chance he'll come over here, but he's probably not going to. And if he starts coming over here, do what I do. And he's like, well, what's that, Dad? And I said, just talk yourself out of it. Like, this isn't going to happen, or I'm not going to be able to do this, And he said, okay. And so I hear this bird slowly coming our way, and he's like, he's not going to come. He's not. He's starting to talk to himself. 40 minutes at 50 yards, full strut, gobbling maybe 5 or 6 times. And you can see Finn just talking to himself, and he's calming down. And I'm calling to that bird just ever so slightly. So I'm down in the lower portion of this little blind, just trying to make it as quiet as it can and sound like a hen that's just off into the woods, because he can see my decoys. So, if I call too loud, he's going to know like something's fishy. I should be able to see this hen. And so I just purring and putting to him real quiet, and he's slowly coming my way. And then some jakes gobbled on the other side of the food plot. So he'd turn his fan towards them, giving them a big show. And then he'd turn back towards us. And so every time he turned away, I just kind of yelp a little louder so he'd come and turn towards us. And he just put on a show for like, it ended up being like an hour. And finally he worked into range. I yelped a few times. I said, when he sticks his head up, buddy, you shoot him. Don't shoot him in full strut. He sticks his head up. I'm like, you can hear in the video, I'm like, shoot him. And my call is like rattling in my mouth. I'm like, shoot him. And all of a sudden you hear Finn go, and the turkey moved. So this gun has like a long trigger pull. And, I've been teaching Finn to, it's a mantra that you tell yourself when you're shooting any weapon, so that you don't just pull the trigger, or, you just tell yourself when you get the aim that you want, you tell yourself, watch it, keep it. And your subconscious mind will naturally aim, and you just keep pulling. And when it goes off, you get that surprise break, and you shouldn't flinch. But so Finn's been really practicing that, and that really made me think, wow, he's really focused. He's really into his shot here. He's doing everything right. And all of a sudden the bird, he goes, I can shoot him now, Dad. I'm like, you sure? And he's like, oh no. And I'm like, all right, well, wait, no, I can shoot him. And he's going back and forth. I'm like, bud, when you have a shot, just kill him. That bird got to where he wanted, and he pulled the trigger, and down it went, and he flattened him out. And he's, I told Finn multiple times, I said, buddy, if you shoot a turkey and you just see me sprinting after this turkey, don't freak out. Don't get all alarmed. I'm just going to try to make sure he doesn't get away. And, with that bird, he flattened it, and Finn's like jumping up, screaming, I got to go get him. I'm like, buddy, he's done. And he's climbing out the windows of the blind. And, just one of the best moments of my life, besides my wife having our 3 children, that was probably at the top of the list. So a hunt that'll never leave my memories. Not that any of them do, but that one will stay up there for quite a while. Turkeys are a really cool animal to teach your kids on, but it's also, you got to have extreme amount of patience, especially with them being 8. I'm really, if you look at the video, kind of have the gun on a shooting stick, and we can move slow and get them positioned and just try to make everything perfect for them. It's helped me with patience, because I think during those moments, I'm more excited than he is. And I'm telling him, buddy, calm down, as I'm breathing and my heart's pounding out of my chest, The best part of it is sitting down at the dinner table that night, eating his breast meat out of that bird, and him just looking around the table, realizing what he did, and his sister's eating it and his mom eating it. And, just, he really gets it. I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people, that they fail to do with their kids, even especially nowadays, is really expressing the ethics behind hunting, the reason why we do it and try to do it, to have wild game in our life and have that freedom to be able to do that is pretty special. So when parents, I don't think, enforce that enough, and I really try to make him understand that, hey, we're not just out there trying to kill everything for fun. Like, we take a lot of respect in doing it.
This next story comes from Kelsey Sullivan. Kelsey's a wildlife biologist and the migratory and upland game bird leader for Maine's Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife. Now, he's been on the podcast before to discuss wild turkeys in Maine. His role here includes overseeing the state's turkey management plan, including to help craft its seasons and bag limits. He's also an adult onset hunter, and I was really curious to hear about his hunts, since he comes to turkey hunting with the unique advantage of having worked with these birds for many years in the field. You can find him on Instagram as @KelseySullivan43.
I did not grow up hunting. I do have pursuit of natural resources in my blood just from fishing. I grew up fishing for stripers and bluefish and that kind of stuff, but never picked up a gun and never shot at anything. And before my position here, working on game birds, I had 10 or 12 years studying birds, capturing birds. They weren't game birds, but they were, it was the same kind of thing in the fields, figuring out behavior and kind of adapting to how they respond to the different things. So I'm lucky that way. Somebody that grows up hunting probably is at the same point. They grow up pursuing things and adapting and learning behaviors and figuring things out. Well, right off the bat, I had the advantage of I was actually still trapping birds when the pandemic hit, and we transitioned from trapping large groups to I was trying to target individual birds at that time because they were breaking up. Early mornings, I was going out to a site that I thought I might be able to catch birds. So, and that was on Verona Island, which is just on the north end of Penobscot Bay. So I was already in the mindset of pursuit of birds, but it wasn't for hunting. And I think that because of that, you know, I was keyed into turkeys. Where are turkeys? Are the turkeys over there? You know, and so driving down to the site that I was scouting, not far from my house, maybe 4 miles, I caught out of the corner of my eye a group of toms displaying. This was mid-April. This was about mid-April, April 15th, and it was a group of toms, 4 toms, a jake, and 1 hen, way up on this power line. And I thought, that'd be a good place to turkey hunt. And I just bypassed it and went and scouted this other site for the trapping. And so then I started to think about it more, and you know, I'd get up early, and it's something I really hadn't done a lot before, was pattern the birds and kind of get an idea of what's, you know, in the past I've woken up at 4 in the morning, walked a power line, called, and then when I got response to gobble, I'd sit down and set a decoy out. That's how I've hunted before. So it was different this year because I was already in that pursuit of turkeys mindset for work. And so I patterned these birds over the course of a couple weeks, and they were still there, and every time I went. And the other thing too I learned this year, I think I was just a relearning, and I'm sure many turkey hunters know this, is that, you know, you can wake up early in the morning and get a bird off the roost, but I think you have also the opportunity to call a bird in at 7 in the morning or 9 in the morning, and so that was what happened to me. You know, opening day came, and I was probably more excited than usual, probably because of the pandemic, and like anybody else, just wanting to be outside and doing things. And so on opening day, that's the day I went out, and it was a really cool hunt. It was an adventure. My gear load's light and simple. I wear a vest that I carry a hen decoy and a jake, and then I have a mouth call. I have a slate call, but the beautiful part of it is I have a wingbone call. I traded it to the director of wildlife in North Carolina for a pint of maple syrup. So basically that's what I had: wingbone call, mouth call. I had the 2 decoys, and that's about it. That's all I have in terms of. I have a 12 gauge Remington 870, and I picked that because that was the firearm that we used in Alaska for bear defense. And I just, you know, I love, they were very, you could drop them on the boat, drop them in the water, salt water, as long as you spray them out with rem oil, they still perform. So that's why I have an 870. And I do, you know, wear full face camo. I try to remember to wear my gloves and lose them all the time. But so anyway, back to the hunt. It's a power line, big power line right away, and pretty wide open. And at the time, the foliage was not really well grown. So there's a railroad trestle that crosses the marsh stream. While I was watching these birds on one side, every so often I'd pick up birds on the other side. And I think it was the same because I saw 2 hens fly across this. It's not a huge river, but they flew across one morning. So I decided the opening day that because I had heard birds the last time I was out across the river, I brought a canoe with me, and then so I brought my canoe down, launched into the river, crossed under the trestle bridge, and then hiked up into the power line. It was a perfect adventure day, and that's what I had been anticipating and hoping for, was just, you know, let everything else go and just focus on being in that moment. And it worked out really well, except that when I got there, I called, and, you know, the turkey I thought was going to be there was there, and he was gobbling. And so I tucked behind a rock and put my decoy out, and he came out to a clearing and gobbled, and I called, and he gobbled, and I called, and then he turned and walked away from me. They don't always respond like you think they're going to respond. But so anyway, I made the call, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and did exactly what I didn't want him to do, and more power to him. And so then this beautiful power line is like rolling hills, and there's lots of ups and downs, so you can go down a valley and whatever's on the other side won't see you. And so I kind of walked down the power line and walked into the woods and called and nothing happened. And I ended up about 2 miles down the power line, and I glassed with my binoculars way over this knoll that was further down, and I saw a tom. He was just kind of strutting around on this hillside, and he didn't see me. I had all these rolling sort of contours that could block me, and so I could see that he was actually headed towards me. He was probably, I'm trying to think, I don't know, 600 yards away, maybe something like that, maybe 500, and he was going down a hill, and so I tucked into the woods and then cut through the brush on the edge of this power line by the rock wall, to a point where I thought I could get to without him hearing me or knowing that I was there. And so I snuck out on another little knoll that he wouldn't see me coming out, and put a decoy and sat in a perfect spot right under a small pine tree. Was just quieted down, called, and then heard a gobble, and then I think I only called one more time, and then I just shut up because I expected he was heading my direction based on what I had seen and what I had heard. And so I just sat tight, very quiet, and lo and behold, 6 or 7 minutes later, he came over that little knoll and was heading right for the decoy. And that's how I ended up getting him. As soon as he came along and was right, like sort of in line with my decoy, I was ready to take a shot. So as soon as I saw him come up, and he was focused on the decoy, I had a very clear headshot. His whole body I could see it at that point, but he didn't know I was there. And that was another thing that I learned last year, is I had a very similar experience. I didn't harvest a bird last year, even though I hunted probably 6 times. But last year I did the same thing. I set my decoy out in the middle. This was a different spot, and called, a lot of response, gobble back, call, gobble, and I didn't shut up that time. And just as I'm getting ready to do my 35th call, he comes over the hill and sees me move, and then he's gone. So I guess learned a lot last year that I applied this year. So, but yeah, he just walked into where I had my gun aimed, and so I took the shot when he came by. I heard a good quote on the radio the other day, which stuck with me. The guy was saying how people get caught up and get hectic and excited, and he said, as soon as you feel yourself speeding up, it's time to slow down. And I thought that was a good piece of advice. So that was that hunt. That was pretty cool. It became more ingrained in me this year in terms of, as a hunter and watching behavior, that there's a roost kind of energy, and then there's this sort of 7 o'clock witching hour, not witching hour, but sort of another wave of energy when toms are kind of relaxed, they've got off the roost, so that there's actually another nice little window to be able to interface and have an opportunity to harvest a bird. And that my second bird was, I think, at 7:30. So, well, it was very similar to the first one. I hunted 5 days, I think. So I got my first bird on the power line, and I wanted to avoid going back to that same spot. There were 4 toms there, and there was 2 jakes eventually. So at first I was thinking, well, let's not pressure that spot. So I tried 3 other spots, and that was when I learned, and it reinforced what I was hearing from other hunters, was that after those first few days, birds seemed to quiet down. They sort of seemed to not be around, and that's what I experienced at the other 3 days that I hunted in the different spot. So, and the other thing I did this year, which was new, was I joined the Maine Turkey Hunters Facebook, just to kind of glean off of what other people are experiencing and get in touch. And it seemed like it was what was being said on there in terms of what bird people were seeing was pretty true to what I was seeing in a general sense. So that was pretty informative for me. I think it was May 18th or 19th when I got the second bird. And, it becomes kind of your pursuit until you get that second bird. And I said, all right, I need to focus on something else. So I went back to that power line, and instead of going over the river, I went left up the other side. So I was, 3 or 4 miles away from where I had got the other bird. And that was an interesting hunt too. I learned a lot about that, the roost behavior and just calling, and I had heard it before I hunted that day, birds calling while in the roost, 45 minutes after sunrise, sitting tight on the roost. And I saw it visually because I went up and called. I got a tom to call back, and I hid behind a boulder, and I could see him on a tree on the branch. And I think legal time, I can't remember, was 4:54 or something. And I was calling, he was calling. We did that for about an hour, back and forth. And it was pretty cool. I'd call, he'd gobble, back and forth, back and forth. And I didn't have a decoy out because when I called, I felt like, all right, I need to tuck behind this boulder. I was that close, so I was worried so I just hid and started to call. And so we went on. He was in the roost a good hour after sunrise, and calling back, and I could see him, and then I saw him. I watched him the whole time. He pitched off the branch and glided down and sort of headed towards me, and landed about 120 yards away, 100 yards away. And we called back and forth for another half an hour. And he just didn't want to come that way. He just did, whatever the sound I was making, it just wasn't appealing. And so I just stayed tight and watched him. And again, on the power line, there's those knolls that go up and down, and I just watched him kind of veer off away from me in the completely opposite direction. And as soon as he went over that far knoll, I just, belly crawled until I felt like he wouldn't see me, and then I kind of went on my knees and kind of snuck up to the other side. And then, very similar to the other hunt, I just plunkered down. I did have time to put a decoy out, so I put a decoy out, and then I used the wingbone call, which was the whole morning, and I don't know if this is why, but all morning I was using the mouth call. And I think it was a combination of two things. So he veered off and was gone, and I snuck up, and right around 7:15 or something, I was in position again, and he was down a little valley and up another little knoll, and I could see him with my binoculars. And so then I just did a couple wingbone calls, and not very many, and he turned, and he didn't gobble that time, but I could see that he was headed my direction. And so again, I just laid up in the rocks and waited for that opportunity when he came in front of me. And that was so very similar to the first hunt in terms of, but the difference was that calling back and forth was really cool and interesting and a little frustrating, but it was a good learning experience. We're really trying to maintain and provide the opportunity for people to allow for a good quality turkey population and into the future, I guess. And I really mean that too. It's just the more and more I study them, but also the more and more I hunt. We're privileged. It's a pretty awesome resource, and I want to see it persist the way it is. And hopefully it will.
I go to New Hampshire and I go out and scout, and I don't know a lot of spots out there. We bear hunt out there, but I tend not to be out there as much in the spring. I don't have a lot of good spots, but I got one area that I kind of know. I'm driving around at dawn and just looking for birds. And I drove by one little area that had been cut, and I see a tom, and I make a mental note. Then it was opening day. I went out, and it rained. I mean, it downpoured. I sat in my car, and 4 a.m, just like such a hard rain that it was like, what's the point of getting out of the car? I'm not going to hear any calls. I'm not going to be able to do anything. So I came home, and so I missed that day. So I go out the next morning. And I already knew where I wanted to be. I had seen this bird, and I had dropped it. I had gotten out of the car and put a little reflective strip on the side of the road to mark that location. So there's a little pro tip. If you're trying to find your way into an area, leave yourself like Hansel and Gretel style something. So I left myself a little reflector so I'd know where to park. Got out, walked in, set up 3 decoys. I set up a tom, or a jake, a quarter strutting jake. So he's nice because he's not a big tom, so he's not going to scare off a tom that's maybe a little less mature. He looks like an immature tom or a big jake who's strutting like he's about to breed. So he's going to annoy a tom, because the tom's going to think like, get out of here, you're not breeding these hens, boy. So I've got him, and then I've got a breeder hen. She's got no legs, so she just sits flat on her belly like she's about to be bred. And then I have a lookout hen who's standing real tall with her head up like she's looking around, and she's on a stake and she'll swivel around 360 degrees. Even a good breeze will get her like spinning around. So I set up this little scene, my little menagerie. I back into the woods and I'm up against a tree. And I just sit. And my favorite part of the turkey hunt is just sitting there in the dark, watching the shift change as the nighttime nocturnal animals kind of start to fade out, and then the daytime animals start to come in. So it starts with, all these different bird calls, and then I hear the crows overhead. If there's water nearby, we'll start hearing the loons. I'll start hearing the like cackling of the blue jays. The whole thing starts, and then eventually what feels like the king of sounds at that time of the year, you hear your first gobble. And I don't know how to describe it. It just echoes through the woods, and because it's the thing you're looking for too, so when you hear it, there's a sense of, I have a chance. It's kind of like, let's say you're playing bingo or lottery, like you're doing a lottery thing, or like a raffle. If they read off the first number and you have that first number, you're like, oh, I'm in the game, right? If you're looking at number 5 as your first number and they start with 6, you're like, oh, what's the point? You tune everything out after that, right? But if it's like your number, it's like, oh, I'm in the game. So when you are like sitting against a tree with a shotgun and it's loaded and your decoys are out and everything's good and you hear a gobble close by, you're like, oh, it could happen. This is really exciting. So I'm backed up against this tree. I hear some gobbles, and off to my left on a trail, I see 2 birds fly down, and they're probably about 75 yards away. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And I'm almost thinking like, it's too easy. It's too easy. I've already had 2 pretty good days, right? And it's just like, come on, really? They're just going to come in. It's that easy. So they start heading in, and I give some very light cuts and some very light purrs. And as they come in, I realize, oh, there's no beards. These are both hens. So I'm thinking there's got to be a tom around. For anybody who's turkey hunting, who's like, oh, I'm only seeing hens, it's like, well, don't leave, because hens are going to bring toms, So they come in and they see my decoys. And there's one hen is larger than the other one. The smaller one kind of walks through the decoys, checks them out, and then just carries on and just starts like gently feeding through this field. But the bigger hen just goes and starts attacking the lookout hen that I have. She ignores the jake and the hen that he's breeding, and she goes right after this one and starts just smacking it with her wings, almost like the way if she was going to bring her wing, like put her arm around it, except like smacking like that. And that's causing the decoy to start spinning. And the more it spins, the more riled up she's getting. Eventually, she starts biting it on the back of the neck and on the back of the head. And she is just, it's a spectacle. She is just attacking. And she's making a lot of noise. A lot of like sounds that I don't normally hear because I'm not close enough. But this is like close enough that I can hear everything she's saying. And I'm starting to hear the gobbler in the woods. And I'm thinking like the sound she's making sounds like something's wrong. And I want her to go away. Like I want her to stop, because I'm thinking you're gonna like keep this tom from coming in. He's gonna know that there's some problem out here. Well, she finally gets like just a solid bite on the back of the head of this decoy, and she just runs in circles. And the decoy spins, and she goes around like a merry-go-round, and it doesn't stop. I sit there for 20, 30 minutes go by. She's still just doing this. And the tom's in the woods, and he's gobbling, but he's not coming close. And I'm not calling because she's right there. And I'm like, if I start calling, it's going to get her attention, and this is all going to go wrong. I don't want her to start to puck, and then I lose it's like something could still happen. She attacks this hen for 40 minutes, and no change. She's just running in circles. And she's trying to, I can see her trying to force the head of this hen down. And my impression is she wants this hen to bow down, kind of. Like, I can't imagine she would try to kill it. It's more like, I'm the top hen here. Like, you need to submit to me. And obviously my decoy cannot submit. And this is driving her crazy. So eventually I make the decision, I'm going to have to ignore her, start calling. And she's so hung up on this that even when I start to use my gobble call, and, you know, the thing about the gobble call is, you know, it's like an accordion-shaped big black rubber thing, and it works two ways. Either you can sort of like wobble it in the air, like if you picture somebody with a big old nasty sex toy just shaking it in the air, that makes it go, or you hold it and then you sort of pat it from the back and it's like, so either way there's a lot of movement. What I found to be the least movement is if I point the thing toward the bird and then do it against my body so that I minimize how much waving around they see. So I'm doing that. She's not even looking. She's so focused. I mean, this is happening 10 yards away from me, 15 yards away from me. She's so focused on what she's doing, she's just ignoring it. But the tom is kind of starting to, I'm getting his attention. And eventually I realized there's another hen in the woods. And I can see her. And then I see him because it's still like before sunrise. It's misty and I'm in the mountains. So it's quite beautiful. Like there's a fog in the air. I start hearing just the strangest sound. And it takes me a second to register that it's the spitting and drumming. Because I don't hear it that often. You know, you got to be fairly close to the animal or have the right quality of like air for the sound to carry. I think most people know what it is to feel a sound more than you hear it, particularly if you've been around bass, where it's like there's something more in the fluids in your body than it is in your ear. And just this really strange sound where it's like a kind of a sound, like a kind of thing. And it's carrying through the air, and I'm thinking it's something industrial, a machine, a vehicle. What is that sound I'm hearing? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's coming from that tom. And that sound coming in close, it's haunting. Because their gobble's already pretty haunting in the first light morning air and the coolness of that first light. Especially when the mists are rising and all of that. I mean, it's pretty haunting, but this other sound, it's really, really special getting to hear that. So it's kind of neat to be close enough to a tom to pick up that sound. And all of a sudden I see his head as white as a light bulb glowing in the dark. Like he's just glowing in the woods. So I see his head, but there's no shot. I mean, there's tons of timber. There's all kinds of stuff between us. He's 100-something yards away. And he's kind of going back and forth and he's chasing this hen, but I'm getting his attention with this gobble call, and she's just still there doing the merry-go-round in front of me. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to carry on like she's not here then. So I keep calling, keep gobbling. Every once in a while I do a hen call, and he's zigzagging back and forth, but he's coming closer and closer to the wood line. And his head is just like those LEDs that people have in newer model like BMWs and stuff, when they're behind you and you feel like you're being pulled over or something. It's like those incredibly bright blue LEDs, like white blue. That's his head, and it is just shining. And I'm just like, come on. And he starts to come toward the wood line. I'm thinking, oh, if he comes much further, he's going to see that Jake. And the way that it's positioned, I'm right behind the Jake to him. So if I gobble, it's going to look to him like it's this Jake. So he gets just to this point, and I give another gobble. And she's still doing the spinning around on the decoy. And he sees the Jake decoy. He doesn't care that this hen's attacking the other hen, not even on his radar. And the hen attacking the decoy doesn't care that the tom's right over there. It's like no one's paying attention to anybody except I'm trying to pay attention to everybody. And he just sees that Jake, and everything shifts for him, and he just bullets, just straight running right at the Jake. And I'm worried. I'm thinking for a second how cool it would be to just let him come in and have her beating up the hen and him beating up the Jake. That would be really amusing. But I'm also thinking I might not be able to get a shot without poking holes in my Jake. So as he comes barreling in, he drops down out of his strut. So his tail fan goes down. His head is leaned out forward. They kind of get their weight forward when they're running. And so he just comes running in neck out. And as soon as he poked through the woods, I blast, bam, just knock him down. The hen who's attacking the decoy flies off. The hen that first came in behind, with her, flies off. And it's not even sunrise. And it's just this beautiful, foggy mountain morning. And man, his head was, because it's like a fish when you get a mahi out of the water. It's like the most brilliant blue and electric green color. And then within seconds, it's fading out. His head just stayed so bright white and blue for a little while. I got some really cool photos of him. And then that was it. And my season was over, So I scun out all the birds. And I keep the fans and I keep the beards. The beards are really easy. I mean, you just kind of pull away from the bird itself. You just kind of stretch them out. And then they just cut right off really easy. So I usually just stick those in salt. I'll put the fan, I'll stretch the fan out so it's spread wide, lay it on a baking sheet, and just put salt. I'll cut away as much meat and fat as I can from where the feathers attach. So I've removed as much meat as possible, and then I'll just cover that in salt. And I'll also just stick the end of the beard in salt. And I used to keep all the spurs off their legs, but I'm after a while, you're like, oh yeah, I got this pile of spurs. What am I going to do with these? So I've been just using the legs now, the feet and legs as stock. And I don't care so much about those spurs, but I do like having the beards. But again, I have this huge pile of turkey beards, and it's just again, I have no use for them. Once I got the skins off the birds, I broke them down this year as breast meat, and I really take my time using fillet knives, getting off the entire breast as one nice big piece. And then under that is what I assume is in the comparative anatomy is that the breast meat is the pectoralis major, your pec muscle. Now you have a second muscle under your pec that runs from a process of your shoulder blade that pokes through to the front of your body. This would be hard for people to picture, but you think of your shoulder blade as being on your back, but it actually does poke up front here. You got your acromioclavicular joint here. So you got this little process right here, and you've got your pectoralis minor, which runs from here to some of your ribs in the front. I'm pretty sure that's what we call a chicken tender. So when you take a chicken breast off, underneath you have a chicken tender. Well, all the birds break down the same way. I've never broken down like an emu or an ostrich, but everything that I've broken down from, geese to ducks to turkeys to grouse to woodcock, and then even to really small birds. Now I also haven't broken down a hummingbird, but I've broken everything down from let's say robin size, even smaller, like a dove, and pigeons, all the way up to turkeys. They're all the same in there. So in a dove, you'll get that very small little tender, but in a turkey, the tender's like a full protein meal for a person. So I take off the breast meat, set those aside. So let's say we'll say that a breast is one of the pecs. So we'll say there's 2 breasts per turkey. Those I freeze all of them. I don't cook any of those fresh because that's meat that I want to have through the year. So I set all those aside, but the tenders I typically cook those pretty fresh because they're just these perfect little cuts of meat. But I take all of that meat off, tenders and breasts, put them on a wood cutting board, and then I get out my little Tech Point hand wand magnetic detector, my little metal detector, and I very carefully search that meat looking for any pellets. I'm shooting heavy shot, which is a bismuth tungsten alloy, and that will break a tooth. Turkey hunting, you are allowed to use lead shot, as opposed to waterfowling where that's federally controlled and you can't use lead. So, I don't like to use the lead shot though, and a lot of people are using shot that's heavier now. You just don't want to bite down into that. And then with lead, you can bite down into it. It's soft enough, but do you want to bite on lead? It's of course not, right? So I don't want lead shot to pass through the meat. And leave, as you know, if you took a piece of lead shot and ran it across a white piece of paper, you would see it leave residue. So it's doing that as it passes through the meat, and the meat's got fat marbled into it, and you're depositing lead. It's just like, I don't want that. So the problem is the heavier stuff is tooth-breaking kind of material. So I'm searching that really good, and I'm thinking not about my teeth, I'm thinking about my wife's beautiful smile. You know, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, I don't want her to lose her beautiful smile. She's worked really hard maintaining it over the years, and she's plans to keep her teeth. So I do not want to break one. So I search that meat really good, you know, find all of that. If there's any, if I get any beeps, then I kind of scalpel my way into the meat, trying to do minimal damage to it to identify that piece of shot and get it out. Okay, so then I vacuum seal and freeze the breast meat. Then I took the carcasses itself, you know, kind of, you break that apart so that the front half of the carcass and the back break away. And then I just took my knife and I filleted out this year all of the dark meat off of the back. If there was anything on the neck that wasn't shot up, because the neck sucks up a lot of the shot. That's what you're trying to hit. So whatever meat could be taken off of there that wasn't bloodshot, I took the meat off all of the wings. Like, it really skinned everything out and took the meat all off the legs. So this took a little bit longer, but what I ended up with was this beautiful pile of clean meat that I ran through my grinder. And so I got all that dark meat as turkey burger meat. Vonnie's like not a huge fan of braised meats, but she really likes burger meat. So I can go either way. Turkey braised meat is not that important to me. I'd rather braise a deer neck or something anyway. So, and I like the lightness of turkey grind, especially in like a stir fry or something. And I really love turkey meat with sausage type spices like rosemary and thyme, oregano, salt, lemon zest, all that kind of stuff, and work that into the meat. Oh man, I love turkey sausage is a good flavor. So I like to do that into patties and cook like turkey burgers. It's really good. So we had quite a lot. I can't remember exactly what we put away, but probably like a dozen pounds of, you know, beautiful turkey grind. And then the tenders I'll cook right away. And actually the first meal is the hearts, livers, which I shared a lot with Ellie this year too, because Ellie was pretty excited. I like coming home with the birds, and then she gets upset when she sees me leave at 3:30, 4 in the morning with a shotgun. She knows, okay, Dad's going hunting. She hates it. She wants to go. And then when I come back, she wants to know what I did. And so I love I don't know why, but I love opening the back of the truck, and she comes in and sees that I got a bird. I don't know, somehow I'm like proud. She's all excited. So I like cooking it for her too. So we share the giblets and the gizzards. Throughout the winter, I'm not cooking like a turkey breast. I don't find it like nice to just cook the whole breast. I tend to cube it into 1.5 inch, 1 inch cubes. And then I'll put those in a bowl with, I really like toasted sesame oil. I like to go with more Asian flavors on turkey. So I like toasted sesame oil. A little bit of a vinegar is nice. Not too much, but like a splash. Like I said before, lemon zest is really nice. I'll use the wild leek olive oil prep that I make. Put that in there. And orange zest is really nice. Even a little orange juice can be really nice. Anyway, I'll mix all that up. A lot of salt. Yeah, ginger's a really good one to add into there. Lemongrass, anything, any herbs really. And then sage, obviously, really nice too. And then let that kind of marinate for a while, and then I just flash stir fry it. And that's one of my, serve that with vegetables or whatever. So good. So that's the plan for the breast meat. Wild turkey isn't something like, it's not like Thanksgiving where you just cook the whole bird. It just doesn't come out nice. For us, we're always cycling. It's like fish one night, white meat the next night, red meat the next night, go back to fish. And then I like to cycle between oily fish and white fish and or lean fish. And it's nice with this because I can do the white breast meat of the turkey, and now I also have all that dark meat. And I mean, the color of when I say dark meat, it's like a red. I just feel like I get the turkey hunting thing. What I think is really interesting too is I'm not real motivated as like a travel hunter. Like I don't have that like I got to go everywhere and hunt everything type of thing. I'm very interested in what's going on here. But seeing some of the other turkey species around the country, it's pretty neat. It would be that idea of the Turkey Grand Slam where you get one of each species, or the Turkey World Slam where you include the South American species. It's kind of neat to me to see these different birds, and I think it would be neat to have that experience, because I feel like I'm getting a good handle on hunting turkeys in Maine, but in New Hampshire, but not necessarily what they're like everywhere. I mean, there's a pretty substantial turkey hunt down in Florida. When I see pictures of people who've been hunting in Florida, and there's like the background foliage is like salt palmetto palms, it's so weird to me. The idea of a semi-tropical or subtropical turkey hunt just seems like really cool. Like, it'd be really neat to participate in that. So I think it would be cool to eventually stretch out a little bit. If you've never hunted turkeys before, and in particular if you're new to hunting and you're looking for where to begin, I think that turkey hunting is a fantastic inroad into the world of hunting. It's pretty easy to find a mentor. There's quite an established going out with somebody kind of culture around turkeys versus, other hunts where people tend to want to be solo. A lot of deer hunting is done solo, for example, here in the Northeast. But going out for turkeys is like, it's a little more communal. There's a lot of action in turkey hunting. So if you think about deer hunting, you could spend days and days and days in your stand and never see a deer. But with turkey hunting, you can get into birds, and even if you don't harvest, you can be around action really regularly. They're a lot less daunting to break down than your first bear or your first moose or your first deer. It's just a very manageable sized game animal, but it's big enough to get your heart racing. When I shoot a squirrel, I don't get this feeling in my chest like overwhelming, oh my God, adrenaline rush. I just think turkey hunting is a great place for people to start. It's easy to find mentors. The National Wild Turkey Federation is doing so much work to create inroads for people. So like to onboard new hunters. You could watch a YouTube video on breaking a turkey down and be ready to do it that afternoon. A shotgun is a much simpler weapon to get into than a rifle. It's a much safer weapon to get into, and if you're worried about knowing your pellets are dropping off at 50 yards and having no penetration on a person, for instance, you're not worried about where'd that round go, any of that stuff. So much simpler to get into, and it's really, really fun. So I just think if you're looking for how to add wild meat into your diet, and you live in a region where there's turkeys, this is a really, really good place to start.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed Podcast. You can help us grow the show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.